climbs off all by itself. It does it itself. Okay?
Yeah, you're right there with me though.
Every time I open the hangar door to go flying, I realize that I'm one of the lucky guys doing something that I dreamt of as a kid.
Review. I'm Dan Boland, and with me today I have my compadre, Dr. Bill Harrison, who's going to be doing some of the questioning today. But we're very fortunate to be able to do 18 of these Warbird in reviews. Today the subject is a C-54 behind us here, this beautiful aircraft restored, and we're going to talk with Colonel Gail Halvorsen, who was a candy bomber, and he's going to tell us some great stories about the Berlin Airlift. Bill?
Well, I think most of you probably have an idea of what the Berlin Airlift was. How many of you know? First of all, let's see. How many veterans are there here of any war? We got a lot of wars now, so you have to keep track of everybody.
Thank you for your service.
Yes, thank you very much. Anybody here who flew in the Berlin Airlift?
One right here.
One there. Oh,
oh,
good,
one over here.
Good man. It was in many ways it was one of the greatest accomplishments in aviation. You know, the 2.5 million tons of supplies delivered to the people of Berlin. You have to realize this was just 3 years after a war where we were trying to kill everybody in Berlin, and they were trying to kill us. So I think it says a lot for the ability of the Air Force to do it, but I also think it says a lot for the people in this country who bury the hatchet, not in somebody's head, but put it down, the old story of turning swords into plowshares and working with our former enemies. And you'll see a lot of that. You see it with Gunther Rawls and Shorty Rankin. The animosity dies when the war dies. You know, as they say, the people fight it, but the governments are the ones who make wars. So we are delighted to have the peace war here. This was a war that was fought to try to avoid a war by keeping the people in Berlin supplied. I think you want to start off with Tim.
Yeah, Tim, let's talk a little bit about the C-54 and its role in the Berlin Airlift.
Well, when the airlift started, they used C-47s. That'd be the equivalent to our C-130s today. They had to get off to a quick start, so they gathered up what C-47s were in Europe, but it became known very quickly it couldn't carry enough. So the call went out for C-54s from all around the world. One unit was out of Puerto Rico, and I'm happy to say that to honor that group, in March of this year, we flew the airplane to Puerto Rico to honor Ramey Air Force Base, plus the group that had the 16 C-54s. So before it was over with, 330 C-54s were being used for the airlift. Not all at one time. About 180 were used on a daily basis, and the rest were in various phases of maintenance and what have you.
Well, how long did it take you to get this aircraft restored?
It's still going on, and that was 15 years ago. It never ends. It took 2 years to get it airworthy. It was in what they call a ferryable condition. We got it in Canada after a 4-year search that I was making to find an airplane. And a good lesson to learn, just because you have your eye on an airplane doesn't mean you're going to get it, because there's competition out there. And the ones with the money get the airplane. I had no money. So it took 4 years to find it.
Well, it's really a neat thing to do. I think it brings a part of history to the public that they wouldn't otherwise get. You know, you think about the combat, but this was a different kind of war. And frankly, it wasn't over till '89. Sometimes I think it isn't over now.
Exactly right. Now, where this history ends on the Berlin Airlift, we are going to pick up that history in our Boeing C-97. That's going to be the history of the Cold War era. And it'll take a couple more years yet to get our Boeing C-97 up and running.
Right. Well, I'm going to call you Colonel because I just met you, so we're not on a first-name basis yet, but it's an honor to have you here today, sir. Can you tell us a little bit about the Berlin Airlift, the onset of it, how it came to be, and the dangers involved in this?
Thank you, Dan. Let's be on a first name. That's what we're at.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm a farm kid that grew up busting clods and hoeing sugar beets, and so this airplane is really my salvation. Well, the Berlin Airlift, I was flying foreign transport operations out of Mobile, Alabama, and got a call that next morning we're leaving for Germany to feed the former enemy. And it wasn't a surprise to those of us who stayed in after the war, because we'd been briefed every month about what Stalin was doing. He'd just taken Czechoslovakia and just taken Hungary. He had 100 divisions. He was headed west. He wanted West Germany. So knowing that, why, we knew who the new bad guy was. And it wasn't too big a surprise. But we left on very short notice. The airlift started the 26th of June, 1948. I left for Germany on the 10th of July. And that was right at the beginning. We had mixed operations with Goonie birds and C-54s. At the end of September 1948, we phased out all the C-47s, and all we used was the C-54s. When I got there, it was a cowboy operation. General Tunner hadn't got there yet. General Joe Smith was running it, doing a good job based on trying to get 4,500 tons of food into Berlin each day to feed over 2 million people. And the first day, the Goonie birds got in 80 tons. So there's a lot of pressure on us to get going fast. We did 3 round trips when I got there out of Rhine Mine, 3 round trips a day. That took about 16 hours. Go to bed and do it again. Later on, we got down to 2 round trips. Right at first we going pretty fast. We thought it was pretty funny if we could take off out of Rhine Mine behind one of our buddies after him and then get back to Rhine Mine before he did. That meant we had a faster unloading crew in Berlin, or else we passed him somewhere in the quarters. And it was wild at that time. We didn't have a lot of discipline as far as route and integrity of flight's concerned. When Tunner got there, he changed things real fast. He made every flight into Berlin and out of it not a mixed VFR, IFR thing, but made it a IFR all the way. So when the weather went bad in Berlin, why, we were just on a string, and at first we didn't have radar to help us, but that made a big difference. He's very strict on airspeeds. We didn't have long-range radar till November 48 to kind of stretch us out. That would get us out the River Elbe, 70 miles out of Berlin, and he'd tell us to slow down, speed up a little bit, or whatever, and that dropped our blood pressure a good deal. But before we got a radar in August, Dan, of 1948, in August, we were clear as a bell. We got about to Berlin, and we were on a mixed flight plan. Got into Berlin, the weather socked in and stayed there for 2 days. We had an airplane coming into Berlin every 5 minutes. We had an Adcock low-frequency range for letdown. It took 12 minutes to get out the bottom. It wasn't long. We had it stacked up. I stacked up to 10,000 feet in the soup in over Berlin, holding on Wedding Beacon. Inbound, all of a sudden, right in front of us come another C-54, exactly the same altitude. Almost hit prop tips. See the pilots and crew chief's eyes. We went by. They lost total control. Airplanes coming in that stack, didn't know where they were. I found a hole and went out and circled in it till things cleared up a little bit. Tunner came in the next day. He got in the same mix. He called up traffic control and said, look, send everybody home, and I'm going to be down and straighten out this mess. And he said, who's talking? He said, General Tunner. He said, yes, sir. They sent everybody home. Red Foreman, their chief pilot, and Bettinger, one of his chief planners, went down there and set things down for a while and changed a lot of the procedures. Said from here on, if you miss your approach into Berlin, you're not going to circle. You're going to take all that stuff right back to West Germany. Well, that made a lot of us land below minimums. We didn't want to take the stuff back to West Germany, but if we didn't get on the ground, we took it back. So he changed that. That probably saved my life, or else extended it a little while. So we were glad of him. Then he said, look, guys, you guys are going into the terminal building in Tempelhof, and you're taking too long to get your hamburgers, or else you're taking too long talking to the Fräuleins in there. The airplane's sitting out in the ramp, ready to go, empty, and you're still in the building. No more of that stuff. Nobody's leaving the airplane from here on. You're standing right by that plane, get number 3 going as soon as that last sack of flour's off, and get back another load. But he was a pretty smart general. To make up for it, he made a mobile snack bar. It came around, loaded with beautiful German Fräuleins, very friendly because they knew we didn't have time to date them, and it was a really good mix. So Tunner was a genius, really, an airlift genius. Some guys give too much credit to pilots, Berlin Airlift. The real military heroes of Berlin Airlift were the 31 guys who gave their lives, Americans and 39 Brits, who gave their lives for a former enemy who had become a friend. They were the heroes. But in the living guys, besides General Clay and General Tunner, the aircraft mechanics, not the pilots. There would be no airplanes over Berlin if it wasn't for the aircraft mechanics on the ground. No room in the inn, no room in the hangars for the airplanes. And the guys were out there in the wintertime, and I was flying in the wintertime with a canvas flapping in the breeze, middle of the night with a light on them, fingers sticking to the head bolts so we could get in the closed cockpit to fly them. Those guys were the heroes, not the pilots. In November 1948, had the worst weather of the winter as far as fog is concerned. There have been very few airplanes land in Berlin. Hadn't been for the guys on the ground. The GCA, the ground controlled approach radar guys, pros from the States, talked us right down between the buildings. We knew when we passed the buildings would get 50 feet off the ground because they'd tell us you're 50 feet off the ground. Minimums were 200 and a quarter, but lots of times, so we wouldn't have to take it back with GCA, they'd put us right on the end of the runway. There's a red light on the apartment house, and we see that go by. That confirmed the GCA guys were right on, as long as it was just off our wingtip. I got movies. I got a video I showed here the other night in the woods. Anybody see that video in the woods the other night? Well, you see the airplanes coming between the buildings in the fog? Well, that's the way it was. Well, I've taken too much time. Give it back to you, Dan and Bill.
Oh, no, you could never take too much time. It's the stories that make it important. I have a question for you. How many mid-airs occurred during the whole process?
I think there's only one. There's only one mid-air. But
that's the amazing part.
Yeah. After Tunner got going, my blood pressure went down 20 points all the way around the circuit. He was just a genius guy.
How many pilots do we have in the audience here? How many pilots? How many of you have flown a GCA approach?
Wow. Well, that's great.
It's a very difficult approach. You have a controller on the ground, and he controls your lateral and your vertical by saying turn left 2 degrees, you're 200 feet low, climb now. And the guys got really good. I mean, they got a lot of practice.
Actually, it's fun.
Oh, yeah.
It's fun to shoot one. The fun one, though, to me is the no gyro approach where, turn, stop, turn, and they just tell you when to turn, and they don't know where you're going. Actually, I was doing a practice GCA into Kirtland in Albuquerque, and they lost me. And I forced them. I said, we're going the wrong way. And so I pulled the hood up and looked out. We were way out west of Albuquerque over the desert. And they just completely lost us. So you didn't want that to happen. I think that ours weren't paying as much attention as they were to you in Berlin.
Yeah, they never lost anybody. And the thing about it was you flew so many approaches that you knew just exactly where to put the power. And man, between the pilots and the guys on the ground, you set your power and airspeed. Man, it was just like shooting fish. Those guys were good. Absolutely fantastic.
Okay, you'll be known forever as the Candy Bomber. So let's hear the story one more time. I know you get tired of telling it, but we want to hear it again.
Well, but make it a little brief. Anybody since the Continental Army, the military have given their rations to people. It's nothing new. It's been going on since the Revolutionary War. We've been sharing our rations, and so that's nothing new. I didn't do anything new. But I met 30 kids on the end of the runway in Berlin and talked to them for an hour. And those kids hadn't had any gum and candy for months, and they didn't have enough to eat. And when I turned, they were cheering me up. They say, hey, it's July. Weather's good, got thunderstorms and lightning stuff. But wait till fall comes, and if this thing's still going on, you're not going to be able to get in here. They didn't know we had radar. Not going to be able to get in here. When that happens, don't worry about us. We don't have to have enough to eat. Just give us a little. Someday we'll have enough to eat, but if we lose our freedom, we'll never get it back. My American-style freedom was their dream. Hitler's past and Stalin's future, breathing down their neck, trying to take West Berlin, was their nightmare. Those kids had their heads screwed on straight. And I stood there amazed. They were telling me about freedom, how important it was. Well, I turned to leave, and all of a sudden I knew these kids were off the scale. During the war and after the war, I'd flown foreign countries, walked down the street in a military American uniform, and the kids that age would chase you. And we'd always give them candy and stuff, but they'd want more. And they had it. They want more. These kids had none. In that hour, they had me dead stopped. And not one of 30 kids put out their hand and said, you got some chocolate? You got some gum? And when I realized that, the restraint it took, they're so grateful for flour to be free, they wouldn't lower themselves to be a beggar for something so extravagant, something more than freedom. Boy, I just blew my mind. I said, crumb, I got to do something. All I had was 2 sticks of gum. 30 kids, you're going to have bloody noses. Get out of here. I started to go back, and I never see them again. I was supposed to be in bed in Rhine-Main, but I hitchhiked back so I could leave the airplane and get some movies. And I'd be flying that night. I'd be flying 24 hours out of sleep. Never see these kids again. And so I went back to fence, broken in half, 4 pieces. The kids got half a stick, looked like $1 million. Here come the crowd. And they didn't fight. They asked the guys with a half a stick for the wrapper. And they carefully tore off little strips of the wrapper and the tin foil and gave it to kids that didn't get any. With a piece of paper, they put it up their nose, and they smelled it and smelled it. I stood there totally dumbfounded, just out of the States. A smell put them on cloud 9. I got to do something. I said, I can't come back. An airplane came overhead. Thought, boy, I can airmail it, deliver it tomorrow. But I haven't got permission. I'll get in trouble. Well, the airlift's not according to oil anyway. Starving 2 million people, what's a little gum? So I said, kids, come back tomorrow. Stand in the open place. Come in over your head. I'll drop it to you tomorrow if you'll share it. Oh, man, did they go crazy. Went back to West Germany that night. I had to get a ration. I had a ration card once a week. Couldn't buy much. Co-pilot and engineer, I said, give me your ration. Going to buy a camera on the black market? Could have. Nope, this is what I'm going to do. You got permission? No. You're going to get in trouble. I'll take responsibility. Give me your ration. The good guys, they gave me the ration. Of course, I was writing their ERs, too. So they gave me their ration. And a big double handful. Holy cow, chocolate bars. And that's heavy. And I thought, wow, hit him in the head with that going 110 miles an hour will make the wrong impression. So I took on 3 handkerchief parachutes, split it up, slow it down, they could see it. And did a little test project and went back, started flying that night. Next day, went over Berlin, clear. There they were, right in the middle of the open place. They hadn't told another soul. Wiggly Wings of the airplane. They went crazy. They want to know how they know the airplane. So I wiggle the wings. So that's easy. They didn't want to watch every airplane. I'll just wiggle the wings when I come over the homing beacon. Over before I go over East Berlin. Dropped it. I can still see their hands in the air. And then unloaded 20,000 pounds of flour in 20 minutes. And boy, I hope the guys lined up to take off didn't see that and got my tail number. I'll be in real trouble. And then I worried I pulled it over the barbed wire. But taxied out to take off. There were 3 handkerchiefs waving through the barbed wire at all the airplanes. Mouths going up and down. Boy, they got it. John Pickering, my co-pilot, says, they know who you are? I said, nope. Didn't have a name tag on. Little non-standard there. Didn't have it on. Had my hat on. Didn't know I was bald-headed. So I said, no problem. Just don't tell anybody. Don't worry. Every day the kids were out there. Few more. Waving like mad. Pilot said, what's wrong with the kids? One guy said, I thought my gear wasn't up. I went around. Well, we didn't tell anybody. We didn't tell anybody. So next week came around, more kids. Hey, let's do it again. 3 weeks we did it. Big crowd. Bad weather in West Germany. Weatherman didn't come to the airplane. Ran into base ops a second. huge stack of mail on top of a map table. My girlfriend hadn't written me for 2 weeks, didn't expect mail in Berlin. Well, what's that? Went up to look at the letters. To Uncle Wiggly Wings, Tempelhof, base of operations. Schokoladenflieger, chocolate plier, base of operations. Holy cow, I said, we're in trouble. Went back out and said, post office full of mail, we got to quit. We did quit. 2 weeks we quit. Then we looked at each other and said once more, and that's all. And if you ever said that, you're already in trouble. Do a 180 and get out of there. Well, we weren't smart enough. 6 parachutes, 2 weeks, Wiggly Wings, May Day celebration. Went back to Berlin and said, that's it, we're through. Too late. Next day back from Berlin, Rhine-Main, officer comes steaming on the airplane. Who's flying this airplane? My buddy said, he is. Why? He said, Colonel, I want to see you right now. What for? He says, he'll tell you. And Colonel on, he says, Halvorsen, oh, what have you been doing? I said, flying like mad, sir. I'm not stupid, he said. Well, what else you been doing? For 15 minutes, I thought I was going home early with a court martial. Then he pulled out a newspaper, threw it on the counter in front of me, and there was my airplane, tail number and all, parachutes coming out of it. He says, you almost hit a German newspaper guy in the head with a candy bar yesterday. He's got the story all over the world. Why didn't you tell me? And I says, sir, I'm military. There's no excuse, except I didn't think it hurt anybody. And he says, well, General Lieutenant called me up. He says, hey, Hahn, hey, what are you doing dropping parachutes over Berlin? General, we're not dropping parachutes over Berlin. Colonel, you better find out what's going on in your outfit. Clunk. Well, anyway, General Lieutenant said, keep it up. It's a good idea. Thanks, General.
Colonel, that's a wonderful story. I understand that when you first gave them chewing gum, that they all swallowed it. How did you stop them from swallowing the gum?
Well, I didn't stick around to find out. But I know that there's a gal. How many have seen that gal dressed in red on the documentary that got her gum and she swallowed it still today, grown up? She's still swallowing it. But the kids didn't know any better, and I guess, but it didn't cause indigestion. We didn't have anything else to mix with it much.
Do you still have any of those kids that contact you now?
Well, that's a good question. About 12 days ago now, a 7-year-old girl that wrote me and says, look, we live right by the airport and in an apartment house, and we got a bunch of white chickens. And you guys are making your approach right smack over our apartment house. You're scaring them. They think you're a chicken hawk. They're not laying eggs. They're losing their feathers. And holy cow, it's bad for us. But
this lady right here.
Yeah, that's 7-year-old gal, right there. She wrote me that letter, and she says, "But when you see the white chickens, drop it there. Don't care if it scares them." Well, I couldn't hit her. By that time, American Confectioners of America, all the candy makers said, "We'll give you all the chocolate you can drop. Just tell us where to send it." We couldn't tie the parachutes.
The name of this book is Mercedes and the Chocolate Pilot, The True Story of the Berlin Airlift and the Candy That Dropped from the Sky.
Yeah.
By Margot Tice Raven.
That's right.
That is really cool.
Well, I'm going to walk over to that other Berlin Airlift veteran and get his comments while we're here.
Good, Bill.
Let me just answer that question very quickly. Mercedes, 12 days ago, there was a teacher convention in Kansas City. 700 teachers from Korea to Germany to the Hawaiian Islands. And they got Mercedes on the phone, flew her and her husband to Kansas City just 12 days ago, me from Salt Lake there. The moderator read every word in this book to 700 teachers. They stood up, applauded. We went on the stage, and they sold 500 of these 12 days ago to the teachers. That's your answer. I saw her. Every time we go with Tim Chope, and thank goodness this man's resurrecting airplane as an educational tool, we find a veteran.
What sort of recognition did you get from the German government?
Well, the German government gave me the Bundesverdienstkreuz to the Order of Merit.
Easy for you to say.
That's a Service Cross to the Order of Merit. There's a Service Cross, and the Service Cross to the Order of Merit. And it's a beautiful thing you wear in your mess dress. I was at a dinner with General LeMay and his wife in Los Angeles, and I was wearing that thing, and he turned to me and he says, "Germans didn't give me one of those."
Well, he was delivering something a little different, wasn't he?
Yeah, he is a hardware.
You want to get a few questions from the?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Does anybody
Hold
have a question for the candy bomber? Here, I'll come to you.
just a moment.
Hi. When it became known that you were doing this, did your other aircraft teams pick your theme up and start doing this? And what did you do to kind of mechanize the thing when they started pumping this stuff in from all over the United States? Who made the parachutes, or did you continue to use the little parachutes?
Thank you very much. Yeah, we continue to use the same size parachutes, but we couldn't handle all the candy, so we sent it to Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts, Elm College there. Got 22 schools, an old deserted fire station. They wrapped up 800 pounds of candy every other day, put it on the airplane, and sent it to Rhine-Main. My buddies were all dropping it. We had a map on the wall in Wiesbaden and Rhine-Main to show them where we made the last drop. The guys would drop it. We quit dropping at the airport, afraid of getting the kids run over. So we dropped it all over the city at altitude. Send back the crew chief. He'd go back if he was one of the team members and go back and toss it out the escape hatch like we did here the other day. So that's how we did it. One guy, well, I won't go anymore. I talk too much.
That's what we're here for.
Tim has got do you want to ask a question or a comment?
No, I want to tell one quick story. In 1998, we were very fortunate to fly this back to Germany. Now, I've never crossed anything longer than Lake Michigan, and here I am crossing the Atlantic Ocean in this airplane. And it's a wonderful airplane, by the way. But when we got to Berlin, we had two pilots with us. Gail Halvorsen was one, and a gentleman by the name of Jerry Munn, who had kept telling me on the exact date we got to be flying from Wiesbaden back to Berlin. That would be June 26, 1998. So we called that the Jerry Munn leg. He would fly with me as my co-pilot. So we take off from Wiesbaden with, I don't know if you recall, in 1998, they came out with the Berlin Airlift stamp. Anyone remember that Berlin Airlift stamp? Well, the post office has what they call a first day cancellation. Very seldom done out of the country. But we had the honor to fly 10,000 of those stamps from Wiesbaden to Berlin precisely on June 26 for cancellation. So this was a big deal for us. So I said to Jerry, I said, look, we're going to fly what used to be the corridor from Wiesbaden to Berlin, so why don't you go ahead and fly the leg? Well, on board, we had another veteran who passed away last year by the name of Jim Spadafora. He was flying in the cockpit with us. Beautiful day. You couldn't ask for a better day, and we're just cruising along back to Berlin, what used to be the old corridor. So I turned to Jerry and said, Jerry, can you believe this? Here you are, a Berlin Airlift veteran pilot, C-54s. On June 26th, 50 years later, you're in a C-54 flying back to Berlin in the corridor. And James looked at him and said, and Jerry, you'll do it right. You'll do it until you get it right.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
Could you explain just how dangerous it was to fly into Berlin? You know, you got to pass over a lot of buildings, and you had to stay how far into the corridor, you know?
Well, I talked about that a little bit, and the GCA brought us down between the buildings. The Yak-3 fighters, there were fighter bases, Soviet fighter bases all over around the corridors. Yak-3s would come up and buzz us. They didn't shoot. They didn't shoot because of President Truman. Truman put 60 B-29s on the runway in Berlin, sent Stalin a little note, says if you shoot at those transports, you're going to have a fire in Moscow. So he voted for him all the time. But I think that the one thing that came out of the whole thing is the idea of hope, the idea of somebody has hope. That was what the dried eggs and potatoes were for the Berliners.
You remember the Kennedy's famous speech when he went to Berlin, and his comment, "Ich bin ein Berliner,"
Which means I am a jelly donut, right?
Well,
I don't think so.
Actually, I just went through the end of the last month. I was in the Kennedy Museum in Berlin, and I asked the docent that, and he said, "Well, that's truly it's a good statement." It says in the slang in some places they could interpret it that way, and some people picked it up. But really, she said, I'd like the people to know that that's okay. That it's been on the Berliner means that I was a Berliner. How about that? Is that okay? There's a Berliner. Thank you.
Anyone else have a question or comment? How many corridors
There
were
are
there?
three corridors. The north corridor out of Hanau, coming to the north into Berlin. South corridor from Rhine-Main into Berlin. The center corridor, 20 statute miles wide. The people in the south came in the south corridor of Berlin to Tempelhof and the Gatow. People from the north would come into Tegel and the Gatow as well. One-way traffic out the center corridor, and then they split as it came out of the center corridor, north and south.
You know, the funny thing is, and Danny, you know this better than I, the big airports in this country now use the same principle of feeding.
That's
you,
correct.
You wonder sometime when you're going into Dallas, you wonder where in the world they're taking you. But they're feeding everyone into a corridor so that it makes a safer operation. Same thing you did.
Yeah.
Tim, I got a question for you. What has it meant to you to meet Colonel Halvorsen and to be associated with people like that?
Well, you know, it's something that we savor every second when we're with him. It's great to represent something where you still have your heroes around to share it with you, and it means a lot.
Amen.
But I do want to give credit to, there's one man here, we have to call him the new Candy Bomber. He's not a pilot, but I want to say give recognition to two great crew members we fly with. Can you come out here, Kevin? Steve?
Come on up, guys. Come on up. Introduce them, Tim.
Kevin Carney, our chief flight engineer on the C-54.
Kevin, nice meeting you. Steve, nice meeting you. Thank you for the work you do.
Steve Grubasich, our chief loadmaster. Now, we call Steve. He is the man that drops the candy. So we reenact the candy drop several times a year. Our next scheduled mission will be when the Berlin Airlift veterans have their reunion in September, Norfolk, Virginia. They're taking a side trip to Kitty Hawk. While at Kitty Hawk, we're going to show up with the Spirit and again drop 31 parachutes to honor the 31 Americans. Well, the man that does the dropping is right here.
Danny, I've been asked, would any who are the Berliners right there? Wasn't there another one over there? Would you like to add anything or say something or?
Yeah, I was there last month. I came home the 5th of this month. I'll be going back to Ramstein next month, the 11th, the 6th and the 1st. I've been back there 30 times. I went back as the commander of Tempelhof for 4 years for 2 sticks of gum. 4 years, 70 to 74, because I gave kids 2 sticks of gum. If those kids had said gimme, one child had said gimme, it made them all the same as the other kids. It never happened. Not one child. One said gimme, they never got 20 tons of candy, which they did over 14 months.
20 tons. How many pieces of gum is that?
20 billion, 16, 445 billion, something.
That's wonderful recollection on your part, Colonel. I like that. We have one of the Berliners here. Introduce yourself.
Well, I am Tech Sergeant Jürgen Pietzner, now retired. I have been trying to meet Colonel Halvorsen for many years. Last time in Provo. Before that, in 1999 in Berlin, when he was there and I was there visiting, because I just have to shake his hand. I was 13 years old when doing the airlift, and I must say I never got a piece of candy, not one.
I would like to invite all the Berliners up here, please. Let's get your picture, please. All the Berliners, please come up here. I'd like you to stand here behind Colonel Halvorsen and let's get your picture, please. Would you introduce yourself, sir?
My name is Pete Asmussen.
Pete Asmussen. I like that. Yeah. Pete Asmussen.
Das
It's
ist gut.
Welcome.
And you were retired from the U.S. Air Force.
That's
is that
correct,
not?
sir.
That, okay.
That is correct. Oh, thank you very much.
When did you go in the Air Force?
In 1958.
10 years after the airlift.
Exactly. It took me that long after I'd made up my mind that I wanted to be part of that team, which did what was really unthinkable because, as it was already said, 3 years before the airlift began, they're trying to bomb the smithereens out of us.
And did.
And did. And 3 years after that, we were kept alive by those crews. And I made up my mind right then and there that I had to be part. I had to be part of that group. I had to be one of them. But as a person who had no relatives or friends in this country, it took me 10 years. And I was 24 when I finally came here. And my first trip was to the post office to enlist in the U.S. Air Force, and I stayed 22 years.
When you get ready to quit, I want to ask one question.
Okay. Pete, do you live here now, or do you live in Germany?
Washington, Wisconsin.
Oh, in Wisconsin.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
Fort Washington.
What does it mean to you to be here today with Colonel Halvorsen?
See, Colonel Halvorsen, that's was a surprise to me when I came here to find out, because I have newspaper clippings about him. And I was 7 years old when this all started. And I left Berlin with my parents in 1952, so I've been collecting all sorts of memorabilia and about Berlin, about that period. So I'm surprised that he's still around.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm glad to have you here today. And you got a photograph there, Bill?
It's a newspaper clipping. Auf Deutsch? See? Yes. Yeah.
There they are. They're the kids right there.
Well,
Bill, you got the last question.
I think it's really more of a comment than a question. I think everyone really appreciates the colonel and the crew from this airplane taking the time to come over here and talk to you. But I just have a rhetorical question. Ain't this a great country or what?
Absolutely. Yes.